Well, hello. I am real excited today. We got a guest here today, Daron Day. He's VP of Operations for Workforce Chaplains, and met him the other. Well, it's been been a few weeks ago now, where he was speaking to a group of employees and stuff. Um, his talk today is about building a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. And Darren, I want to let you explain who you are, what you guys do, and then kind of launch into it. I've got several questions that I'm going to ask you at the end, but go ahead and take off.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about something that I'm passionate about, which is helping employers see the need and vision for creating a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. A little bit of history about me. So I've lived in Indiana nearly my whole life outside of education. Undergrad out in Ohio, and then part of my master's training was in Dallas, Texas. So I have a wife, 16 years. We currently live in New Palestine, southeast of Indy. Grew up a lot of my childhood in Brownsburg, west side, and work all throughout the state of Indiana and a lot in the Indianapolis area for Workforce Chaplains, which I'm the vice president of operations. I have did, like I said, the master's degree, master divinity degree, as well as I'm halfway through pursuing to be a board certified chaplain. So 2 clinical pastoral education units in and 2 to go. So hopefully by this time next year, I'll be finishing up that as well as working the last 5 years in chaplaincy within the workplace. Which is just an exciting and growing field because wellness benefits and whole person approaches to employee care and wellness is a growing field. And so I'm excited for sharing with you all some of the vision that I see for chaplaincy, but not even chaplaincy. That's just one piece of what I really want to share is a bigger vision for a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. So Workforce Chaplains, what is that? So we provide spiritual care as an employee benefit to a variety of companies throughout the state of Indiana and beyond. We serve about 25 companies of all different various places and institutions, as well as we have about 25 chaplains, a diverse group that serve employees in the workplace. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Workforce Chaplains, but I really want to dive right into what is a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. So just a brief basic definition would be a culture of spiritual care in the workplace is realized when employees believe they are working for an employer who respects and provides support for spiritual needs. And then I like to add on there and can communicate why. So if your employees believe their employer, maybe that's you as ownership, maybe that's you in management or leadership, you respect and support their spiritual needs, can they communicate why? And if they can communicate why, it's because of 3 areas. They've heard it, they've seen it, or they've experienced, or hopefully all of the above. So when it comes to their spiritual care needs, as the employee would define that, they've heard their employer say they care about them in that way. They've seen it in action, maybe in how their employer has provided care for the others around them, or they've experienced it themselves. So that's the heart and the goal. What it's not a benefit only. Benefits come into place, and that's a way that employers can show that they care, but it's not in and of itself going to equate to a culture of spiritual care. For example, if a company says, we want to really build a culture of spiritual care here at my ex-employee, company ABC, whatever it is, I'm going to bring on chaplaincy, workforce chaplains. Well, that's an outworking of that heart, but it's not an end goal. We don't achieve that in and of ourselves as a benefit. It's not just a benefit. It's really a cultural thing. It's not pushing a faith. So, in our field, chaplaincy is not a proselytizing, not a faith pushing endeavor, if you will. It's not that. It's not only for religious owners. So some people will presume, well, if you want a culture of spiritual care, that comes from an owner who's religious in some way. That's not, and we'll actually see in a later section on how to create a culture of spiritual care in the workplace, that the companies that are looking at this are not highly religious, and it's all different types of ownership groups. So it is true that an owner or an ownership group or a board that is religious may be more, this may become more naturally or easily to desire to have a culture of spiritual care in the workplace, but it certainly is not only for those types of employers. It is part of a shift culturally to valuing the whole worker, the whole person in the workplace, and also part of a shift away from having a work self and other parts of my life self. So work Daron, non-work Daron. Culturally, and we'll talk about that a little more in the whys of creating a spiritual care environment in the workplace. But for a lot of workplace history, there was more of this concept of, I have the work me and I have the rest of me, and I keep them as separate as possible. I don't bring myself to work. And in part, that would go into things of my spiritual needs, my beliefs, and that sort of thing. That line is not seen as much in the workplace, and progressively employers are looking to provide care for the whole person. That's why you see an influx of new types of wellness benefits that address the whole person. Because in short, I think they rightly see that those parts of an employee matter and impact their performance. So it is a part, I think, of that movement culturally in the workplace. So one article I just mentioned was speaking on this topic, and they talked about some of this idea of what it is to have a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. And they define two key ingredients, if you will, or outcomes. One is you create a vision wherein the organizational members or employees experience a sense of calling in their life, where their life has meaning and makes a difference. So you're building into your culture and your community that these lives of these employees matter. And the second part of a culture of spiritual care would be establishing a social organizational culture based on love, whereby leaders and followers have genuine care, concern, and appreciation, both for self and others. So people feel understood and appreciated. So conceptually, you're talking about an environment or culture that has a culture of spiritual care is one where there is a concern and appreciation for self and others, and that is readily understood by the employees. Our goal is that employers would see emotional spiritual care as really a third piece of a wellness triangle, as we would say. So you have medical care, physical, if you want to call it, care, and employers have long saw the need and value for providing that type of care in the workplace. You also have mental health care needs, and that has come along a little more slowly, but is, I think, if you survey around, most companies have within their benefits package and in their concern and in the talk that they now share and how they communicate their care for their employees, it involves providing care for mental health. That makes up two pieces. In our mind, there's a third piece over here that's emotional spiritual care that employers are starting to begin to realize they do have a role in providing care for, they can have a role in that, it's a great opportunity for them to improve the total wellness of their team. So for evaluation, if you're an employer out there, how you might evaluate, ask yourself the question, would most of my employees affirm that we respect and provide support for their spiritual needs? And when you think about that question, think about, have they heard us say that? Have they seen it in action, and have they experienced it? A lot of times we might assume that employees understand we care about them in their emotional, spiritual selves, but if we're not communicating it, if we're not showing that, then they actually may not realize that. So that's, if you will, a section on just what is spiritual care in the workplace. A second one, and I suppose, Jim, if you I kind of have this in 4 sections, if you will, 5. So if there's a particular question that kind of fits to that topic, if you want to jump in as I'm walking through that, there is kind of a structure that would allow for that. So that in terms of what it is to have a culture of spiritual care was just some brief introductory notes. So a second section I wanted to cover would be why. What are the whys? Why do this? I mean, who's expecting my company to have a culture of spiritual care? Why would that be important? Well, I see several things. One, because people often process work impacting stressors through a spiritual viewpoint. So work impacting stressors, things that are going to actually impact productivity, retention, lots of things that matter to employers and is their responsibility to look after. A lot of those are impacted through a spiritual lens. What are some examples? Well, take grief, for example. Grief is something our society is dealing with a lot right now. You go through a pandemic time, people lose people, people are faced with fear of death, mortality, these sort of things. Oftentimes, grief comes with a high level of spiritual process, and we process it from a spiritual perspective because we're thinking about end of life and what happens after we die. And so your employees, as they lose someone, as they're thinking through grief, oftentimes the best means to help them in that is providing spiritual care resources for them, because that's how they see grief and death from that vantage point. Sadly, during the pandemic, because of other concerns, a lot of people did not get to experience the typical traditions that allow them to deal with grief. They weren't able to go to the funeral for someone that passed. They weren't able to hug and spend time with their relatives. And that created really a huge challenge emotionally, mental health, and for people because they weren't able to grieve as they traditionally had. And so resources in the area of spiritual care, that's just one example of how grief connects. And if you have an employee that's not dealing with grief or other areas, it can play into days missed off of work, their productivity, and just overall how they're impacting the climate and culture within your company. So grief as an example, guilt, people dealing with guilt. How do you explain that in some sort of physical, mental way? A lot of times that's tied to beliefs about who they're supposed to be, who they want to be, morality, other things that are intersecting with the spiritual and often religious belief systems of people. So those type of needs. Fear often involves spiritual needs. And so if you're not providing resources of care for somebody, those are all areas of their life that have an impact in their work performance that currently you're not addressing. So that's one why, because people's physical and emotional needs can be reached through spiritual care. So that's kind of the other side of the coin. It's an opportunity for you as an employer to make a huge impact on people. So oftentimes people receiving care for medical needs or mental health needs oftentimes is starting at a place of spiritual care. Think about somebody going through a trauma or terrible time or crisis moment. What do all the popular songs, what do all of our cultural normatives say? We turn to God, we look up, we pray, we get on our knees, we pray. I mean, these are things, even if somebody's not highly religious, culturally, in crisis moments, we start oftentimes with looking to areas of spiritual need. So again, it's a way for you often to meet even other mental health care needs, physical needs, through providing some spiritual care and a culture of that to your team. So oftentimes supporting someone in their spiritual life is a great way to impact them and help them to see you do really care about them and build that loyalty, build that relationship you want to have with your employees. So maybe that's a paid volunteer day, allowing them to do work for something that they believe in. You think about your life, things that you really care and are passionate about. Some of those may, for you, involve beliefs or things even for you would consider spiritual. And so as an employer, you have a great opportunity at times when you create a culture of spiritual care to show your team, I care about the things that you care about most. I care about you, and I care that you are doing well in those areas. So one of the reasons of why to proactively create a culture of spiritual care is because naturally employees tend to be fearful related to spiritual care issues and bringing those to work. Employees are fearful that their company will either judge them or be against them talking about spiritual things, beliefs, or values that they have. And so changing that narrative, so this is a company where the whole person is invited. They want all of me, and they care about all of me. They respect me, and they respect my beliefs is huge. That's a huge value for a lot of employers. If you look at the demographics, if you're listening because you're from Indiana, or I would expand that to America, it's a highly religious demographic. And so you are switching a narrative that will really help them value you as their employer. I read I'll read one person's comments on this. I think they did a good job of summarizing this concept. It says this: being able to bring one's whole self to work, though, often depends on whether it's convenient for employers to accommodate that whole self. Think about factory settings. Workers come from a wide variety of religious and cultural backgrounds. This can lead to conflict. So there is risk on not creating a culture of spiritual care. For example, there was a large meat solutions company fired 190 Muslim immigrants from Somalia after they protested the company's break policies, which affected their workday prayer time. Or take another case this is from retail, where a teen who had a Muslim faith was turned down because of their headscarf that was part of their spiritual religious tradition. The Supreme Court in that case ruled nearly unanimously that the company had discriminated. Now, those are dramatic examples, I get that, but that concept of, do people feel comfortable and that the workplace respects and cares for them and their spiritual faith walk, is something that employees are dealing with each day in the workplace. People sometimes feel like it's going to be awkward or impolite or unwelcome for them to have faith beliefs or speak of spiritual things. Even though, of course, the United States is a quite religious country. I spoke to the demographics, and but it seems to be one of the two things, of course, you're not supposed to talk to people about, right? Politics and religion. So I think, though, that sadly what's lost is that people, and even in the workplace, there is openness to bring the whole person, and even some of those conversations, if done in a mutually respecting manner. So you are creating a culture that allows that to be expressed. Otherwise, I think we're missing out on providing care for the whole person. So a few other reasons of why people are oftentimes today less connected to some of the traditional methods of receiving this care. So maybe even as I'm talking, some of you might think, well, this isn't our job. You know, we're making hamburgers, or we're providing care to senior residents, or we're selling people cars. Like, why do I care what, that's what churches are for. That's what, people's families are for. Well, here's the thing. Either you see the opportunity to grow the way your employers see you and how you care for them, or not, but there's a huge opportunity, and part of that opportunity is based on some cultural norms. So people are less connected in their communities. Pandemic did not help that, obviously. People are disconnected from churches and some of those traditional methods. And a lot of even those faith communities, churches or parishes, are the religious places where they can gather and get that care, are now in a model where they don't have good connectivity in personal relationship to people. So bottom line is, people oftentimes don't have those ways, and so they aren't being cared for in some of those ways. So you, as somebody who is a part of their life, have a great opportunity. And so that's a why. Another why is because, like we mentioned, workplaces are now becoming more welcoming to the full persons. One HR professional said it this way: we have to realize we get the whole person through the door. We get their backs, their hands, their minds, their hearts, and they are all at different places in lives. So we have to do our best to take care of them. They're going to help us succeed. It's been said like this way as well: creating a workplace where employees feel psychologically safe is really about a value system of how we value employees, not just making them part of the machine, but seeing them as a whole human being. And lastly, on the why, I would say because it's good for business. There's growing scholarship and study and media reports, corporate interests related to spiritual care as a part of what the workplace seeks to provide and the value in it. There's other articles and things that I could point to from as larger groups like GM and Ford, who look at how they have chaplaincy through some of their benefits and the value that they saw, and to other places, and of course anecdotally, as working for one piece of what a company can do in this area, I can speak to the value that companies have seen. So I believe it does make certainly many indirect, but even some direct correlations to retention, how employees see you as an employer, productivity, days missed off work. There's a lot of ways in which, for you as a business owner, potentially can help the bottom line through investing in this type of culture. So what it is, whys, how. So how to create a culture of spiritual care in the workplace. One, and this is so important, communicate your care for spiritual needs. Communicate it. If you don't say it, again, I think the natural disposition is for employees to fear that that's not the case. So communication is key. Mention the spiritual care potential for benefits that you have during orientation. So as employees are onboarding, this is a key time to set that culture in all the areas that you want to be growing in, and spiritual care would be one of those. Be curious and appreciative of people's spiritual beliefs and the signs and ways they share that. So people all the time around your workplaces, they have necklaces that have crosses, they have traditions, they observe certain holidays, they, be somebody who, and it needs to be appropriate, it needs to be genuine, but who sees and acknowledges, respects, and shares that you're someone that does care for them and their spiritual well-being. When you talk about an employee and they're coming on board and you're sharing your benefits, hey, we want to be there for you and to help you in all areas of life. We care about you. Here are some of the benefits we provide. And you even articulate that you care for them and their whole person, whether that be physical, mental, spiritual. We care about you. We love you. Those are sort of things that build that culture of spiritual care. Communication, key. Make it a part of company care plans. So if you have crisis management plans, you have trauma event planning that you do. If you are going to roll out new benefits, things running through HR, wellness stuff, someone in the room needs to be asking, what about the emotional, spiritual care of our team, and how can these improvements impact that? Make those correlations, make it a part of what you communicate. So some places will do this by creating even physical spaces. So you have companies that are providing wellness rooms, maybe call them a meditation / prayer room, places within the organization. If you're talking about a company that has a physical location, of course, a lot of people are remote, and so that's very different, but that within your physical community, there are signs that we care about the spiritual needs of our team. Become knowledgeable and even able to communicate resources within your community to your team. So if you're in HR or this falls under your area of creating this culture of spiritual care, do you know about resources for your team? So as somebody moves to your company or maybe moves locations where they live, do you know how to connect them to the different religious institutions that they may be interested in? Do you know about other spiritual care needs in your community? So that's one of the hows. Communicate, incorporate that into how you provide care for your team. Another would be specific benefits. So there are some specific ways you can do this. One is employee resource groups. So when I talk about employee resource groups, ERGs, companies that are doing that, Salesforce. So Salesforce has a group called Faith Force, along with all sorts of other employee-led resource groups. They're basically, as a company, turning over to employees the ability, and they give them the structure to be able to create community within the company that will be for different interests, which one of those would be those people of faith. And they give them the tools and permission to bring that part of their life into the workplace through employee resource groups. So a lot of large companies, you see that, Google, Target. Again, these aren't necessarily faith, religious-based companies, right? As you can see, but they are seeing the value of providing care to the whole person. Now, one of the reasons probably these are popular is because they're employee-led. I think that probably quenches a lot of concerns for companies that they're getting behind a particular faith or stepping into political correct issues that they fear. Well, the employees are leading it. It's kind of like schools tend to do this it's student-led. So this is worker-led. So that's one available. You can do some research on it and start employee resource groups. Another is chaplain care. Of course, that's the field that I'm in. So there's a lot of large, medium, small companies, Coca-Cola Consolidated, Tyson Foods, David Weekley Homes, some of the larger names you might know locally. We were able to provide care to groups like American Senior Communities, Cardon and Associates, Gaylor Electric, but we also provide care to a 16-person law firm, to Habitat for Humanity, nonprofits, smaller companies. But chaplain care is one specific way because people understand it culturally from the military and from hospital settings. It is bringing in spiritual care experts that are trained, qualified, and understand how to bring spiritual care in an appropriate, respecting, wherever people are at. And so it's kind of one of those things that you can do that's acceptable, that's been used for many, many years in the workplace and in all sorts of different types of workplace communities. So chaplain care is one. A third specific benefit you could do is ensuring that your counseling options, your mental health care options are accessible, or people have access to faith-based counseling. So you may have an EAP, you may have a pocket of funds for counseling that you offer. Ask the question, if I have an employee that wants to get their counseling through their faith tradition, does my benefit allow them to do that? Because what we find is a lot of employees do see their needs and want to hit faith-based counseling, but the benefit the employer provides doesn't allow it to be used that way. And so one company that we collaborate with and serve saw this, and so they actually put a pot of funds that is available, and employees can utilize that. They will give them so many sessions of counseling, whether they want that to be faith-based or whether they want that to just be from a clinical psychologist or both. They can use the funds how they see fit. It's a way of communicating, hey, we care, we see your spiritual self, we want to support that. And there are several of those around Indiana who provide, faith-based counseling to workplaces. Crosswinds Counseling out of Fort Wayne is one. Care to Change has a couple locations around the city. Those are just some ones that we know, but there's more. Discuss and adopt a mentality to faith in the workplace. So this is just to give you a little teaser to get your minds thinking about how you see yourself providing a culture of spiritual care. So somebody's looked at this and they've pointed out that companies either have one of these type of ways they look at faith or spiritual care. They are either in their faith-based approach, faith-friendly. They might be faith-friendly, which is the idea that, look, they are supportive of people and their faith tradition, spiritual care, but they're not emphasizing one particular faith or promoting that. Faith-friendly. They might be faith indifferent. So they're just indifferent to spiritual care. We're doing nothing, if you will, faith neutral, faith adverse. So some companies maybe don't even realize it, but they've essentially become and created a culture that is averse to spiritual care, or please don't bring your spiritual self to my employment. And some are what they would consider faith-based. So this would be those who see business maybe as mission, and they're private companies that say, hey, our business, I want it to be utilized to bring glory to God and their faith tradition, et cetera, et cetera. So what we see, as a benefit, we particularly are faith friendly in the sense that we are going to respect anyone's held belief. Though our benefit is from a Christian chaplain company, that is the faith it's based in. It's faith friendly in that sense. And if somebody is of a different faith tradition, we will find resources for them if we're unable to provide the spiritual care they need. So, and we work with companies that can be more faith friendly, or some that are more faith based, that see their company and their values as part of their spiritual or faith mission. So a last couple things, and then we'll wrap up, get some questions here. Thank you. I know this, I appreciate everybody that's taking the time to listen. Another how would be give employees a way to care for each other. In creating a culture of spiritual care, you are enabling your high empathy, your gifted in areas of encouragement employees to shine. You have people that see needs happening. They want to meet those needs and provide great love and care across your team. By you communicating, we're a place where this kind of care can happen, you're going to see those people enabled. And all of a sudden, they're going to be advocates for you, and they're going to love feeling like they can utilize their gifts and empathy in your workplace. So you give them an avenue by creating a culture of spiritual care. Listen, you got to listen well, listen to your employees, and help them shape what it looks like at your workplace. So that's a little bit of what spiritual care in the workplace is, why, how, challenges, misunderstanding spiritual care as religious proselytizing. That can be a challenge. Wrongly assuming employees don't want a culture of spiritual care. They just don't want it. They don't. And my employees, they don't want us to provide an option like this. Well, that generally, my experience and the data suggest, if we're understanding what it is to provide a culture of spiritual care, they actually will appreciate your efforts in that area. Cost. What is this going to cost me? Thinking it's the right thing to do, but it's not a needed thing to do. Wrongly assuming employees understand, even though we've never communicated or exemplified, that this is a place where their whole person's welcome. So, Jim, that's when I wanted to run through and give an overview and some ideas and thoughts to unpack there. And I noticed I got the sun. If I sit back here, the sun gets off my face. I just now realized that, so apologies on that, but thanks for the time. And yeah, any questions or things that come to your mind?
Yeah, I've got a couple. One you touched on this earlier, but I think that this is going to be, from an employer standpoint, management standpoint, or what have you. I think that there's going to a lot of times be fear. We're living in a very litigious society. We're living in an area where people all walk on eggshells all the time, and so I could see where people would have a fear that, that if it was perceived to have, favorable to one over another or what have you, how do you basically, first of all, obviously, you worked this out, okay, but how do you explain that to that employer and to their team that doesn't cause those red flags to come up?
Yeah, so part of that is, I think, just transparency about your heart and what you're doing, why you're doing it, and just look, we all, your employees are adults, they're employed, they're smart, they understand, and then they can understand as you create this culture of spiritual care, maybe bringing on specific benefits. They will see the value in what you're doing. And one of the things that they are understand is you, maybe as the business owner or the manager or the HR person, you have your own beliefs. You wherever you're at on that spectrum. And so creating the culture where people can be more open with that and respectful, and hey, we're trying to get care to everybody in their whole person. And for many of our team, that spiritual piece is very important to them. So we're trying as a company to create a place of spiritual care. Now, in terms of favoring one over the other, part of that's just simply demographics. So why a Christian chaplain company like ours makes a lot of sense for a lot of companies in the communities we serve is because a large portion of their employee base would identify in the Christian faith. culturally they understand chaplaincy from a Christian perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that the company isn't providing then care and spiritual care to employees that are agnostic, Muslim, Hindu, or other faiths. The chaplain, that's why, they're specifically trained. Or if you bring in maybe a spiritual counseling benefit or other benefits, it is good to talk about, think about, and ensure, yes, that you are thinking of your full team, and making sure they understand it's optional too. So optional is key. So because there are some people who they don't want to speak a bit about their beliefs in the workplace. They aren't interested in a chaplain conversation. They don't want to participate in a prayer, So to be respectful of them is to make sure they understand this is optional. And again, we're talking about faith-friendly, what I would consider mentalities in the business place. But yeah, those fears, so are all, and all the experience that we've done in 5 years, large companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I really, we've had, as the vice president of operations, and thankful to the Lord for this, from my faith perspective, little to no issues, if you will, that people are fearing will happen if they begin to create this culture. In fact, it's just the opposite, because as you show your heart for people and they realize that you're not simply trying to just convert them to some belief system that you have, but you're trying to establish a culture within your community that provides care for the whole person, then that is seen and understood by employees. And in fact, I know we serve amongst our companies a variety of people from different places, but they know there are people within their employee base that love, and really this is helpful and needed for them, and so they're happy to provide it. A lot of companies will provide fitness benefits or health coaches. Well, you sign up and you go meet with the health coach. They may have certain supplements or nutrients or plans for you and diet and exercise. It's not like the company is stamping their approval on all that stuff. There's an understanding that we're giving you an optional benefit. We're creating a culture that allows you to engage in these conversations. Now, it's up to you all what you make and use or not use, if you will. So if that helps, but there are certainly, people are wise though to think deeply and thoroughly about these issues, but I don't think at the same time that fear should drive us in this. I think the opportunity is too great to help the whole person.
Well, one of the things that, and it kind of harkens back to the talk I heard you give it was at a senior community. And we have just come through, the pandemic. Okay. And now we're in a very challenging economy. There's all kinds of things going on. Okay. And so one of the things that I have, we had one of these, we had a expert panel, I think it was in May because it was Mental Health Month. And I understand that mental health and spiritual and physical are three legs of the stool, but the mental health and what you're doing, I think, kind of really go pretty close together, it seems like to me. So in that one of the gentlemen I had on is the director for the mental health hospital, one particular hospital here in town. Okay. And they made a comment, this was in April of this year. They had 5,000 new calls for people looking for mental health help in 1 month. Nobody can staff for that. So obviously there is a crisis out there. We're seeing a lot of industry, especially in the senior world, a lot of short-staffed situations and turnover and what have you. that to me seems to be where, where the value is right now, is how do we deal with these people that are fraying at the ends.
Yeah. Well, it's a great observation, a sad one, but it is reality. It's both, and I mean, in the senior care, so that's been an area, I think, because the impact of trauma on the senior care industry through the pandemic, as well as the fact that you are dealing with a lot of caregivers in nurses in those job places, that it's been a really good fit with chaplaincy care. So we've come alongside, obviously, several in that community and organizations to try to help, and it does work, and creating that culture of spiritual care, whether that's through chaplaincy, other means, is I think very helpful to that problem of underserved in the mental health field, because you have a lot of people who, in that bulk of those 5,000 calls, some of them specifically do need a 8-session clinical psychologist session, somebody who is equipped and trained to walk through working through addiction or working through depression, whatever the person's going through. Oftentimes, a lot of those calls are crisis calls that people are just looking for someone to help and anyone to help. And a lot of times their need is a listening ear. Their need is somebody to give, to love and care them through a difficult time. Their need is grief. And sometimes you even find people will then get connected with a mental health care professional, and they find this wasn't actually what they needed. What they needed was community. They needed friendship. They needed someone to love them, unconditionally, if you will. So that is where that culture of spiritual care, some of those needs end up getting met or met in the meantime, because we are dealing with a population that many people, either through cost or just availability, can't get the help they ultimately are going to get in the immediate nature in time. And so, yeah, we've seen that we fit for employers meet a key need, and that culture of spiritual care helps alleviate that, because, hey, we can deal with some of this here. We can help some of that here. You don't have this workplace of people who are struggling and grieving and are anxious, and they just have to come into work and pretend like everything's fine and then go figure out a way to deal with it outside of the workplace. A lot of times those people will burn out, they'll leave, they'll change companies. But if they can see you are there for them and you're going to do what you can to help them, that's just huge. But yeah, there is a growing need and desire for those kind of care needs. People are recognizing that, which is in some sense a great thing. People are being more open, but we haven't caught up yet with having the resources available for people and the means to do that. So yeah, we're one piece of that, and it's really satisfying, encouraging to see that when we get to be a part of helping people through those times of need, for sure.
Well, in that same panel that I had, that on that mental health panel, we had another one that came up that really blindsided me. I was not aware that this was the case or was going on or what the causation was. But there's, I guess, a massive crisis in the nursing industry. Not only shortages, but a very high dropout rate. They're getting out of the business, and then a massive spike in suicides. And when asked what the cause, what's going on, and there's so many things, I guess, all the stressors from the pandemic one, but then it goes into, there's a lot of contract work now where people are coming in, they're nursing in this hospital this week and this one next week, and they're just, whoever, they're like hired guns going all over the place, filling in slots. So the team, they don't have the relationships. They're competent. That's not the question. they don't have the relationships, and they don't have the confidence in their team that they know that if they say do this, then it'll be done the way they want it done. And so there's this unending stressor, and there's not that relationship that they have the trust and thing in. And it is just this non-stressor. I mean, so these are the things that I see why what you're doing is such a, because some of the comments that were made at that meeting that we were at where I met you,
Mhm.
it's clear that there's a lot of people that are suffering out there right now, and without really a window to know how to resolve.
Mhm. Yeah, I think some of what we do, but what is the role of, if people embrace the idea of bringing spiritual care to the workplace, is they're creating a path, enabling an avenue to relieve a lot of stress and help people that right now, for some, in some employers, it is not clear. So one of the things that we did, and there's a lot of senior communities that are doing these kind of things, and I mean, we're all growing, learning from each other, right? Because go through the pandemic and now still working through some of the implications of that, but also trying to process and heal. How do we learn from each other? And so one of the things I know during the pandemic, and then, was we would provide a space for these teams to grieve or begin that grieving process. And so you would have memorial services in a senior home cafeteria where the employees gather around and you read the names of the people who have passed. And as they read those names, people can share memories and thoughts, because sadly, in some of these communities, I mean, people had to run and function on crisis mode, and people were passing away at a rate where some of the typical ways and traditions that people would process losing somebody they cared about, in the senior homes, interesting social cultural reality, because it's a workplace, but it's also a home, and those intersect a lot, because a lot of your nurses are doing that profession because they're high empathy and they care. Now, of course, we get these, stereotypes of doctors and sometimes nurses that they see death and suffering so much they become just like cold to it. They can just see all this and walk away and go have a hamburger, and they don't care a thing about anything. Well, as being in senior homes and talking with nurses and people, and we even did a intensive 3-month program for a regional hospital group, and talking to those doctors. I mean, that's, to me, more of the exception than the norm. And people may want to give that impression off, but you have a lot of people who that secondary trauma is very real for. And the solution, sadly, has for many had to be, and sometimes, even, necessary. I mean, people have been in a battlefield and they need some time away, but has been to leave the profession. And in some cases, necessarily, some cases that was because there was no place or no system in place to relieve and get relief they needed. And I think spiritual care resources and that culture is one of the ways to do that. So it's a high value, and so, yeah, you have people that are hurting. The suicide is not, sadly, surprising in the rates of that. People, a loss of hope is detrimental, and with those type of mental health care needs, you need community. That's what pulls people through. And some people have that. Praise God. People have church homes, they have family relationships, people around them. But we oftentimes have a transient workforce. People moving is easy these days, and people get disconnected from community. And so creating some of that within your workplace is just a huge opportunity. So, yeah. And in the senior home community, of course, spiritual care has a long history. Some of those, of course, because those hospital groups, those senior home groups were founded in a faith-based employer kind of mentality. So they were a Presbyterian senior home or a Jewish senior home, and some still are, and they're faith-based in that way. A lot of our senior care space has either migrated from that faith-based and maybe or it was created without that faith connection. So they, in many cases, are faith friendly. I believe that's the heart of it, and that's wonderful. But some have went over into indifferent or even adverse, where employees and are not able to feel like they can express themselves spiritually and have that part of them welcome in that workplace. So our goal is to help people and companies see that and see the benefit of it, and so it is something that is a growing need, and people are starting to see that and starting to see the value of putting some time and energy and effort into it.
Well, I would imagine that your relationship with different companies would depend a lot on what that company wants to do as services and what size they are and what they can afford or what have you. But, do you provide like someone on staff there? Or do you bring in, occasionally to have a group meeting? Do you have just by phone connection where people can set appointments to talk on the phone or meet personally? How do you guys, how does it work? How does the chaplain relationship work in the different size companies?
So we fit under an employee care benefit, and we're a nonprofit, so that either is funded directly from the company, fee for service, or it's through a donor, somebody, or maybe a foundation that wants to provide spiritual care to the team. And it's really three basic areas of care. One is remote care, which would be every employee at that company gets a team of chaplains. So typically we highlight 6 chaplains in the community, 3 male, 3 female. 2 of those are Hispanic bilingual, 2 African American, 2 Caucasian. We have a diverse team, and that's typical. But if that demographic for that community has other ethnic groups that are highly populated in that workplace, or they want to provide, and we have such a diverse team of chaplains that love and care about people. Our goal in that is all our chaplains are equipped and capable of ministering and caring for anyone, but we're trying to provide the ease of connection. Spiritual care issues are a lot of times connected to cultural understanding issues, so we see that and recognize that and want to provide the best care we can. So they get access 24/7, personal emails and cell phones of these chaplains who are available around the clock for them to call, text, email. And there's even very anonymous ways, like through an 800 line email, that they can reach out and get care. We're not replacing crisis hotlines. So of course our chaplains know about those and communicate those if somebody's having suicidal ideation, other things, but we are a line of support through remote care. That's 1. 2, on call. So we relate to companies as someone in their pocket that they can utilize in any sort of crisis need. There's somebody that goes in the hospital, they call us, we send a chaplain on their behalf, goes and visits the person in the hospital. Hey, on behalf of ABC company, I'm here, anything I can do for you, and just go from there, however they can meet their needs. We are on call for company kind of crisis moments, or just, hey, we're having this event going on, could you guys take 15 minutes and do a workshop on anxiety? And we'll give some basic tips on how to deal and start that conversation. We're an easy way to insert and make an intentional space to people's spiritual mental health care needs. That's on call. And then lastly is regular in-person visits. We call those culture rapport build visits. Oftentimes, those are meant to stay out of the workflow. So they're not chaplains in those moments doing a ton of deep, in-depth spiritual care, but that does happen sometimes. Sometimes people have the time and it's appropriate. chaplain, meet somebody at a special moment and just take a walk and really brighten somebody's day. But mostly those are to build rapport, get names to faces, and to give information. And so those in-person visits lead to coffee shop conversations, calls later, where the chaplains, our model is our chaplains are out there making friends with employees. They're being friends, and then they're helping them through their spiritual needs. So those visits build those friendships, and are key. So yeah, that's how we relate with companies. Certainly sometimes they got a specific endeavor they want to do a workshop or something, and we have those, but that's the nature of it.
Well, Daron, thank you so much for coming today and sharing with us. And this will get broadcast out to a lot of different areas. So, well, thank you very much. I will be talking to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Take care.